Welcome to Build Strong Habits podcast channel. This is an audio podcast, so take your eyes off the screen, sit back, relax, and listen.
Hey everyone, ready for another deep dive? Today we're going to be talking about a really interesting mother-son relationship from the show Sex Education. It's Jean Milburn, the sex therapist, and her son Otis. He's trying to figure out being a teenager and all of the complicated stuff that comes with it. Their dynamic is honestly hilarious, but also super insightful. We can all learn a thing or two from them about how to connect with the people we care about.
What I find so fascinating about Jean and Otis is just how open they are. They talk about everything, and I really mean everything. They really highlight how powerful honesty can be, even when it's about things that can be uncomfortable to talk about, which is the real strength of their bond.
Yeah, they've totally tossed out the rule book on how families should talk to each other, right? Remember that scene where Otis is completely freaking out about his secret sex therapy clinic at school? And he has all these feelings for Maeve. And Jean's advice is so simple, but it's perfect. She just says, you can't just shove your feelings down. You have to talk about them.
Yeah.
It's like she's giving everyone permission to be more open and vulnerable.
Absolutely. And it's not even just talking about things. What really makes their communication so great is how well they listen to each other. They don't jump in to judge, they don't interrupt, and they even use humor to bring down the tension when things get tough. Imagine how much easier it would be to deal with stuff in your own relationships. If you had someone you could talk to who would just listen without judging you.
Oh, that's such a great point. I think a lot of us, especially when we're younger, we're so scared of being judged that we just keep everything bottled up inside. But what Jean and Otis show us is that talking about our feelings, even the messy ones, can actually bring us closer.
Sure.
And let's be real, they're not like some perfect family. They mess up, they're insecure just like the rest of us, but they learn and grow from those experiences. I don't know about you, but I think it makes them so much more relatable.
Definitely. Like in that scene where Jean tries to set some boundaries with Otis, but she ends up realizing that she's actually been too distant. So instead of pretending everything's okay, they have this really genuine conversation where they both admit to making mistakes and work through it together. They're teaching us that it's all right to mess up sometimes, as long as we're willing to learn and make changes.
It's honestly so refreshing because, let's face it, relationships are messy in real life. There will always be times where we misunderstand each other or hurt each other's feelings or just totally screw up. But Jean and Otis show us that those moments can actually make our relationships stronger if we see them as opportunities to learn and grow. What are some ways that you've learned from mistakes in your own relationships?
Well, it's interesting because their imperfections also connect to how they approach another topic that's often considered taboo, sexuality. But instead of avoiding those conversations, they confront them directly with honesty and a little bit of humor, which is pretty rare even these days.
That's true. I mean, how many people have a mom who's a sex therapist? Obviously, it leads to some super awkward and hilarious situations, but it also creates this space for them to be open and honest with each other. It's pretty amazing. Like when Otis starts his secret sex therapy clinic at school, Jean doesn't freak out and try to shut it down. Instead, she actually encourages him to be responsible about it. Can you imagine having that kind of support system when you're trying to figure out something as complicated and confusing as sex and relationships?
That's a huge part of why their relationship resonates so much with younger people, especially Gen Z. They're growing up in a world where they can find information about sex and relationships online so easily. But a lot of times, it's not very reliable. Jean and Otis show how important it is to be able to talk openly and honestly with people you trust. People who can give you good advice and support based on their own experience and knowledge, not just what you see on the internet. And we can't forget that Jean's a real pro in this area. It's not just like casual advice from mom. She actually brings this deep knowledge to their conversations that most parents just wouldn't have.
Yeah, it's true. It's like she's this walking encyclopedia of relationship advice, and she just happens to live with him. But what I think really makes it work is that she never forces it on Otis. She offers guidance when he needs it, but she also respects him and lets him figure things out for himself.
That balance is so important. And honestly, a lot of parents really struggle with that. But Jen gets it. She understands that Otis needs to learn and grow through his own experiences. It's not her job to control his choices, but to be there for him and make him feel safe to explore and understand the world around him.
Okay, but let's be real for a second. Having your mom as a sex therapist can't always be sunshine and rainbows. I mean, can you imagine walking in on your mom during a session with a client? That would be so awkward. But somehow, Jean and Otis managed to get through those moments. They use humor and understanding.
It really shows how good they are at setting boundaries. Even in a family that's definitely not traditional, they have this unspoken agreement to respect each other's space, both professionally and personally. Even though those lines get blurry sometimes, it's tricky, but they make it work.
And it's not just about avoiding those awkward situations, right? It's about recognizing that they both have their own separate lives and their own experiences that make them who they are. I mean, yeah, Jean's a sex therapist, but she's also a woman with her own desires and insecurities in relationships. And Otis might be her son, but he's also his own person, a young man trying to figure out his identity and his place in the world.
Exactly. It's about seeing each other as complete people, beyond the roles that they play in each other's lives. And that's actually a really powerful message for any relationship, whether it's parent and child, romantic partners, even friendships.
So far, we've talked a lot about how Jean's job affects her relationship with Otis. But what about the other side of that? How does Otis's journey of self-discovery and his experience with the sex therapy clinic, how does that impact Jean's professional views? Because it seems like their relationship goes both ways. They both learn and grow from each other.
That's a great question, and I think there are little hints of that throughout the show. Remember when Otis starts giving advice at the clinic? And he kind of stumbles onto these unusual methods that actually work. It makes Jean question her own ideas about therapy. And it reminds her that sometimes the best solutions come from places you wouldn't expect.
Yeah, it's like their roles are reversed in those moments. Otis becomes the teacher, and Jean's the student. It just shows how important it is to keep an open mind and be willing to learn from anyone. Doesn't matter how old they are or what their experience is. Have you ever had someone you didn't expect totally challenge your assumptions or the way you approach things?
For Jean, I think it's this constant reminder that the world of sex and relationships is always changing. What worked for one generation might not work for the next. So it's important to be curious and willing to adapt. But even more than that, Otis's willingness to think outside the box and challenge the norm. It reminds Jean how important it is to stay true to her own values and beliefs.
You know, it's funny. When we started talking about Jean and Otis, I was focused on how open they are with each other about sex. But what's really cool is how that same communication style helps them with all kinds of things. Relationship problems, feeling insecure, issues at work. So I'm wondering how much of their success comes from Jean being a sex therapist and how much is just who they are as people.
Yeah, that's the big question. Is it her background that makes them such good communicators? Or is there something deeper? Is it just part of their personalities? It's like, which came first, the chicken or the egg?
I guess that's something we can all think about as we go further into their story.
Yeah.
But one thing's for sure, their dynamic is pretty special.
And it brings up another point. How does Jean's work dealing with all these intimate and sometimes tough situations, how does that affect her own personal life, especially her romantic relationships? It's got to be hard to separate her work from her personal experiences.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
Throughout the show, we see little snippets of Jane's dating life. And it definitely seems like her work influences how she approaches those relationships. I'm really curious to explore that further. You know, it's interesting. You would think that someone who works with intimacy all the time would have it all figured out in their own life, right? But Jean's love life is just as complicated as everyone else's.
Exactly. It makes her seem much more real, I think. She's not this perfect expert who never gets hurt or makes bad decisions. She makes mistakes, falls for the wrong people, gets her heart broken, just like the rest of us.
Yeah, remember the whole thing with Jacob? Ola's dad? They had this crazy chemistry, but their relationship was always running into problems. It was partly because of their own baggage, of course, but it was also so awkward because Jean knew all these intimate details about his sex life from his ex-wife's therapy sessions.
It just goes to show that our work life and our personal life can clash sometimes, and it can be super embarrassing. But what I really like about Jean is that she doesn't let those awkward moments stop her. She takes responsibility for her mistakes, she apologizes, and she tries to move on.
And it's not just Jacob either, right? Think about all the other guys she's dated. The musician, the widower, even that fling with the younger guy. Each relationship had its own challenges and good moments, and she learned something from each one about herself and what she wants in a partner.
It's like she's using her own life as a way to learn. Constantly experimenting and figuring things out is something we can all probably relate to, whether we're therapists or not. Relationships are all about trying things out, seeing what works and what doesn't, and hopefully learning as you go.
But I do wonder if being a sex therapist gives her a different way of looking at all those ups and downs. Does she analyze her feelings more? Does she overthink everything? Or does she just go with the flow like anyone else?
That's a really interesting question. I think it probably does give her a unique perspective. She's probably more tuned in to the psychology of it all, like the patterns of behavior and communication styles. But that doesn't necessarily mean she's immune to the emotional side of things.
Right, because she's still human. She still wants connection and intimacy and love. And even with all her knowledge and experience, she still messes up and gets hurt. She still has to figure things out as she goes.
That's exactly it. And I think that's what makes her journey so interesting to watch. It reminds us that no matter how much we think we know about relationships, there's always more to learn. Even the experts don't have all the answers.
So what have we learned from all this? What have Gene and Otis taught us about relationships and communication and the whole messy process of figuring life out?
For me, it's about the importance of being honest and vulnerable and being able to communicate openly. It's about accepting our flaws, both in ourselves and in the people we care about. It's about being willing to learn and grow from our experiences, even the tough ones. And it's about understanding that relationships are always changing, and that's okay.
I love that. They remind us that it's all right to not have everything figured out, to stumble a little bit, and to lean on each other for support. And that's what makes their bond so unique and special.
It's a dynamic that connects with so many people, no matter their age or background. I think it's because deep down, we all want that kind of connection, a connection built on honesty, respect, and love.
So next time you're having trouble talking to someone you care about,
Right.
or you're feeling lost in your own relationships, remember Gene and Otis. Remember how open and kind they are, and how much they support each other. Maybe they can inspire you to approach your own relationships with a little more honesty and understanding, and definitely a lot more laughter. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. Until next time.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this podcast, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Build Strong Habits.